Bottles thrown, small explosions and weapons late this afternoon after an otherwise peaceful protest all day. Police right now trying to clear out protesters in downtown Portland, labeling it a civil disturbance. At least one arrest has been made today. By many people's standards, that could be considered a success when you compare it to the fights and vandalism we have seen before. Portland police proactively separating two groups known to go at it over political and social issues, effectively mirroring Mayor Ted Wheeler's failed protest ordinance, using orange fencing to keep opposing groups on separate blocks and moving them farther apart at some points.
You see all of this fenced off area, and I know that our mayor will say it's to keep us safe. I think it's probably going to be used as it always is used, which is to protect the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer. And to brutalize the anti-fascist demonstrators.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nina Melhoff. Thank you for joining us. Now, this all started with a planned rally by an offshoot of the right-wing Patriot Prayer Group. They wanted to bring awareness to the men and boys who were scared of being falsely accused of sexual assault. It's called the Him Too movement. We have team coverage tonight on both sides of these protests. Devin Haskins has been following the women and the groups on the Me Too and Antifa side today. But we start with Art Edwards, who has been following the Him Too crowd. Art?
Nina, this all started earlier this afternoon in Shrunk Plaza back behind me. About 1 o'clock this afternoon, people started gathering for the Him Too rally. Began about an hour after that inside Shrunk Plaza. Now, here's what it looked like. There were several dozen people who showed up for the Him Too rally. It was organized by a woman named Haley Adams. Adams and others took turns on the mic during the rally. She also had the support of Joey Gibson and his Patriot Prayer Group. They showed up to offer their support today. Now, Adams told me that this event was about giving men a voice to speak up. She was aware of the counter-protest that was going on right nearby just across the street, but she said that she had hoped that everything would stay peaceful.
They have their right to free speech. I hope when we leave, none of our people get hurt, get jumped by them, because I know that they're very upset right now, but their right to free speech. I hope that we can just both keep the peace, because it's the holidays too coming up.
It's for everyone. Him Too movement is to give these men.
Well, everything did stay peaceful as long as each group was in their respective spaces. And when they left, that's when it began to have some problems. The people tried to make it fun inside of Shrunk Plaza as much as they could. They were playing music, doing some dancing. Now, when we talked with Adams shortly before this ended, we asked if there was going to be a march through downtown. She said no, there would be no kind of march. She was just hoping that everything would come to a peaceful end and that they would be able to go home after that. That is not exactly the way that it worked out here in downtown Portland today. Nina, back to you.
Yeah, that is exactly when we saw those flashbangs and weapons come out. Art, thank you very much. So women's groups and some members of the traditional masked anti-fascist group made up about 250 people on the other side. They say Him Too mocks the experience of assault survivors. So here are some stats to put it all in perspective. So according to the National Sexual Violence Research Center, 1 in 5 women will be raped in their lifetime. 63% of those assaults go unreported. Researchers found anywhere from 2 to 10% are false accusations and are not true. But that also means 90 to 98% are true.
1 in 5 college women are raped or sexually assaulted. This claim has been repeated over and over by journalists, political leaders. It's been said so many times it's almost beyond the reach of rational analysis. Well, as I and many others have said, the figure is wrong, and now there's new data just released last month from the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics that gives us a much more reliable estimate. The 1 in 5 claim is based on a 2007 internet study. with vaguely worded questions, a low response rate, and a non-representative sample. And other studies with similar findings have used the same faulty methods. The real number, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, is 1 in 53. That's too many, but it's a long way from 1 in 5. Now, does that mean that sexual assault's not a problem on campus? Of course not. Too many women are victimized. But it's not an epidemic, and it's not a culture. An exaggeration and hysteria, they shed no light, they produce no solutions. They actually distract
That's
from
what
a real
women at
problem.
this rally really wanted to make clear. Let's go to Devin Haskins with their response tonight. Devin?
Well, Nina, the counter-protesters were kept inside Chapman Park behind that orange fencing that you mentioned. The police trying to keep these two groups from getting too close to one another after some rallies in the past had turned violent. Many groups like Portland Jobs with Justice, Popular Mobilization, and Democratic Socialists of America organized today's counter-protest. They say hearing Him Too and how men and boys are scared of being entrapped by false sex assault allegations, well, it's infuriating and not representative of Portland. Protesters we talked with say groups like Patriot Prayer, well, they're just trying to slowly infiltrate their ideas into the community so they can get power.
Him Too is meant to make believing women and survivors of all genders less likely to be believed. And they already are put through the ringer.
Chase these fascists out of our city. But unfortunately, we have a police force that instead builds a barrier around them and protects them, giving them a buffer, and yet pushes an organization that is like organizing around survivors to a half of the park, putting up a barrier that is very metaphorically similar to the barriers faced by survivors when they report and the protections offered to rapists.
Police kept everyone off of sidewalks and out of the street for most of the day. Police were wearing riot gear. Some were wearing riot gear, some were just wearing masks and were armed from the very beginning. The mayor said that he wants everyone to have the right to free speech, but he wants these two groups to stay apart and not to get too close for one another.
Stop it. Get some help.
Opposing groups going head-to-head today in downtown Portland as they have so many times. One group supporting the Him Too movement, the other group speaking out in support of sexual assault survivors. As with many other recent protests, members of Patriot Prayer and Antifa were among those gathered.
Trevor, things have really calmed down in the past hour since we last saw you, and protesters for the most part have dispersed throughout downtown, so it's basically back to normal as we know it. But so I'm back in Chapman Square, where I spent most of my day today, and that's where the Survivors Are Everywhere protest took place and started at noon. All that's left now is some of their signs that they brought out here. You can see hashtag Him Too equals hashtag ho hum, and fight transphobia, homophobia, racism, and sexism. And so today, earlier, there was hundreds of protesters here, members from Antifa, members from other, sympathizers with the Me Too movement. So here's video of earlier today that shows you what we were all the protesters were here. So they were having a lot of speakers today talking about their personal experience with rape, domestic violence, and sexual assault, and they don't want survivors and victims to be oppressed. So that's why they came out today to oppose the Him Too rally that was happening just across the street from them. So the counter protesters far outnumbered the members of the Him Too rally and those of Patriot Prayer. So for the most part, police kept the opposing groups separated during the rallies. They had fences up, they had police in tactical gear separating the two groups, except they did have to use some flashbangs and tear gas as the Him Too protesters left this afternoon around 4 o'clock, and then the counter protesters and members of Antifa started following them down the street. So that is when things started getting a little bit hectic. They declared it a civil disturbance. So protesters were seen with weapons, and that's when the police had to start getting everyone out of the downtown. So Antifa again was marching around the Patriot Prayer members and the Him Too rally, and that is when we saw a lot of the chaos earlier, just an hour ago. But like I mentioned, things have really calmed down now. This is a lot less violence than we've seen in other protests. There were some protesters who were arrested today, and a lot of that had to do with aggressive behavior and them talking to police or trying to go after those Patriot Prayer and Him Too members. But for now, this is an hours-long protest that has come to a close.
And Elise, thank you. I know that you were with the protesters supporting sexual assault survivors. We want to switch over to Jennifer Dowling now, who is with Patriot Prayer. Jennifer, I know that you have seen a lot of these protests get out of control. Police, of course, in the past tried to keep these groups separate, but often fail. What was different today from your perspective?
Well, Trevor, you're right. I was with the Him Too supporters and the Patriot Prayer folks here in Terry Shrunk Plaza. And what was different? Well, we saw these metal barricades go up around Terry Shrunk Plaza. We've seen that before. DHS officers were also checking bags to make sure there was no weapons when the Patriot Prayer and the Him Too folks were going into Terry Shrunk Plaza. But what was different? If you look across the street there to Chapman Square, before, protesters from Antifa and those opposing Patriot Prayer and other groups were able to come right up to the sidewalk there, almost into the streets, and they were often blocked in the past by police officers at that street dividing line there. Well, this time they had orange plastic barricades, and they had them pushed back several hundred feet, it looked like, into Chapman Square, so that the groups would be very well separated this time. There was no chance for them to come together. That's when we've seen those huge clashes in the past. All this past summer, we've seen fights when the two groups go on the march or get together. So that was different. Also, Patriot Prayer, they didn't have as many folks here as they usually do, and the Him Too movement as well. They're around maybe 40 to 50 people in the plaza. We've seen larger showings from that group, although Antifa did outnumber them. When they left the plaza, that's when things can get kind of tricky, but police were on it right away. They kept the group separated. Even though those folks from Him Too and Patriot Prayer did walk around downtown a little bit, it wasn't as big of a march as we've seen before, and it appeared to me more like they were walking around maybe to get to eventually to their cars, which did happen. There were some arguments along the way.
'Tis but a scratch.
Some clashes, but nothing as crazy as I've seen full-on riots this past summer, people just pummeling each other in the streets. Nothing like that occurred where I could see. Just some arguments back and forth, some shouting, angry words exchanged, maybe a little shoving, but again, nothing as crazy as we've seen here in the past. So I know that the Patriot Prayer Group and Him Too were going to reconvene in Vancouver at around 5:30 on the waterfront there, that according to Joey Gibson, to do some rallying there. As for what's happening now in downtown Portland, very quiet. The two groups have dispersed, and we'll wrap all this up for you coming up tonight at 11 o'clock. Trevor, back to you.
Well, Portland City Commissioners talked on Wednesday, Jennifer, that they believed that there were different steps that police could take, that they had the legal right to take that they hadn't in the past while they were voting down Mayor Wheeler's ordinance. You have to wonder if that was what they were talking about here today, and we saw it was effective.
To you, I say, stop whining.
Gay!
You are fucking scum.
I just peed on myself.
Oh,